When I reached the beach, I pulled my coat down under me and I sat down on the pebbles. And as I looked out across that beach, I realised that that was the beach where Ian had first seen the mermaid. And not only that, but the tracks that I'd just come down, if I looked back up them, they were the tracks that on that first night she'd scrambled up. And as I looked, it was as if I could see Ian. And Ian was standing at the top of the crag. And he was looking down on the beach. And as he looked down, he could see her. He could see her on the stones. But he saw her flick and flip herself over. And then he saw her put her hands down and push herself up. And as she pushed herself up to a sitting position, he noticed that her hair was all matted down her back, and there was sand stuck to her back, and the water was dripping, and it was dripping down onto her tail. And there was seaweed, a clutch of seaweed caught in the fin feathers of her tail. And he watched, just staring, as she turned herself and she shook herself, and then she pushed herself up even higher, and she started to wriggle. And as she started to wriggle, he realised that what she was doing was pulling off her tail. And then he saw her put her head on her hands, and she tossed and she moved, but finally she was still. And he didn't take his eyes from her. And as he watched and stared at her, the stars started to surface in the sky. And still she didn't move. And he looked at what was at her feet, and he thought, I have to get closer. And so he started to step down towards the pebbles, but as soon as he put his foot on one of the pebbles, it crunched, and he stepped back. Now there was matted grass all around the top of the beach, meeting the pebbles, so he walked along the grass until he had a direct view of her in front of him. And then he stepped very carefully, just one step, and he saw that she was still asleep, and he saw that the tail skin was touching her toes. And he knew that very soon she would wake up, and that when she woke up, she would go. And so he took a deep breath, and he took a step onto the next pebbles, and carried on walking towards her very slowly. And each step he stopped and checked that she was still not moving, but she was silent and still. And he was moving so slowly. He'd never moved so slowly in his life. And as he got very near, he put one hand down towards the floor, and he took hold of the skin, and he started to pull it, and then with a sudden movement, he flicked it and he grabbed it towards him, and it was slithering down him, and he was holding it. But as soon as he had hold of it, he set off at a run back up the beach. He didn't care now how much noise he made. By now, she was at the door. And he stood on the other side of the door. And for a few minutes, they just stood there on either side of the door, no further apart than this, neither of them doing anything, until eventually she knocked quietly, and he opened the door slowly. And she didn't say anything. She just held out her hands. And he just shrugged. He said, I haven't got it. And then he stepped aside and gestured for her to come inside. And she walked in, and as she walked in, her eyes were flickering all over him, looking. And then her eyes darted and saw the door at the back open and back to him again. And he said, you can stay here tonight if you want. And he pointed to the sofa. And he knew that she didn't have a choice. He'd known she hadn't had a choice from the moment he'd picked up the skin. And he walked to the chimney breast, to the side, to the cupboard, and took out of the cupboard a blanket and gave it to her.